I have seen a canyon go from a trickle to 10 to 15 or even a wall of 20 feet of water. It's scary, and it does happen all the time in the deserts. Hey everybody, I'm Les Stroud, also known as Survivor Man.
Hi, my name's John Hudson. I'm the UK military's chief survival instructor.
I'm Hazen Ardell.
My name is Laura Zerra.
I'm Dwayne Fields.
Today I'll be looking at wilderness survival scenes in movies.
Desert survival scenes in the movies.
Jungle survival scenes.
Polar exploration movies.
Today we're going to be looking at ocean survival scenes in movies, and we're going to be judging how real they are. That looks to me like they're diving vertically at the sea, and nobody will survive. It'll be like hitting concrete. What tends to happen in airplane ditchings is you're just trying to do a controlled landing on water like Sully did, like Tom Hanks does on the Hudson. The water's going to flush backwards. The best place for Tom Hanks to sit, or any of us to sit in that sort of scenario, is probably near an overwing exit. Definitely be near an exit. If you take cold water, you can only hold your breath for about 5 or 10 seconds. And the lethal dose for salt water is 1.5 litres. So if you're on an airplane and you're not near the exit and it fills with, or a helicopter, and it fills with cold water and you go, you're going to die because you've taken the lethal dose of salt water into your lungs. Have a feel, because you check next time you're on an airplane, when they say your life preserver is under your seat, have a look around and see if anyone checks. I always do. Remember, in a sinking airplane though, do not inflate it until you're outside, because as it sinks, you'll be trapped inside the fuselage. Another bit of Hollywoodism, because all of these life rafts have a weak link on them. So if there's any strain like this put on the life raft, the cord will tear away without ripping the life raft. So that if it's attached to a sinking airplane, the airplane sinks, you don't get dragged down with it. It's built in, it's a clever design feature. He can hold his breath because he's in the tropics, but it's at night and it's in a storm, so in all likelihood the air temperature and everything else is going to be a bit cold. It'll churn the sea up a little bit, you'll get that mixing, so it won't be warm water that he's in. It still is going to limit how long he can hold his breath for. It's a little bit Hollywood going on, I think, this bit. In that kind of storm, is the fuel likely to have caught fire? Probably not, but it makes for a good scene, doesn't it? It looks cool. The aeroplane's landed with such force that it smashed apart and caught fire, and yet we've still got an engine which weighs several tons above the water. So we're kind of playing with time and reality for a brilliant scene here. It's only going to get 4 out of 10 for realism.
Is there anyone alive out there?
This is people from the Carpathia coming to try and find survivors from the Titanic. What signs of life you'll be able to detect? Maybe a ripple. There's some small movement, but by this point, people are going to be unconscious. There's no way you can survive in water that temperature for even more than an hour. You know, half of us will be dead within 45 minutes. So the only people who would have survived were those who were floating on or in something, rather than in the water itself. You can see the ice in her hair, that's realistic. When we do ice-breaking drills in the Arctic with our guys, as soon as you get out of the frozen lake, your hair's like glass straight away. But if you both wanted to survive, your best chance is to both try and get on. It'll be a little bit wobbly, but you're going to lie still. And like we know, the sea was super calm that night, so you've got a good chance of getting on there. If you can get the big arteries away from the water, like your femoral arteries or under your armpits and around your neck, you'll survive for longer.
Come back. Come back. Come back.
What could she do to raise his attention while she's actually on there? Maybe she's got something she can clank together to raise a metallic noise that would carry a long way. That point there where she jumps into the water, what happens to humans on immersion in cold water is that you have an absolutely uncontrolled gasp response, absolutely uncontrollable. So the main problem with Hollywood films about cold water survival is that they never gasp and they never hyperventilate for about a minute afterwards. And it's absolutely uncontrollable. She probably wouldn't have been able to swim, initially at first. We've tested Olympic athletes at the Institute of Naval Medicine on how people respond to this, and gold and silver medalists can't do this. What she's managing now is superhuman. She would have lost her manual dexterity. Absolutely no chance of being able to do that when you're that cold. That's the Inuit sign for greeting, proving that you've got manual dexterity, which is why, grimly, in the bottom of life rafts, you often find human teeth, because it's impossible to open packets. People try to rip them out with fists and teeth. So to adjust a small whistle into your lips when it's going to be frozen to that guy's lips anyway, and then stick it in your own mouth, super unlikely. That's why in modern life rafts we give them plastic whistles, because they're not as prone to those problems. When we get to the specifics about survival and rescue, 2 out of 10. I know of one person from Iceland who survived conditions like this, and that's a miracle.
Matt, 2 or 3 sips a day, yeah? You gotta make it last.
If you're not in control of your situation, you've got to try and find something that you can control. And that's generating a small routine of tasks. Heliographs are a brilliant survival item, packed in most military survival kits. Each little reflective square, each inch of reflectivity will project the sun back about 10 miles, so a 2-inch square like that's good for 20 miles, which for the size and weight of it is phenomenal. This is a pretty accurate view of what people look like after they've been baked in the sun in a life raft for a while. And what you can do to try and prevent that is use anything for shade. So commonly people will take the shirts off and use it as a shade shelter. All life rafts these days have got shade shelters on them. You're going to get blistered and burnt. What people have actually tried to do, if they've got no medicine supplies with them, is any grease they can find. There was a guy in the Second World War who, in his post-action report, described using his finger and any little bit of grease, like maybe behind his ear, trying to use that to parched lips that crack and bleed. People will catch seabirds in life rafts and try to eat them. One of the best things to pack as survival food is a can of dog or cat food, because you'll only eat it if you're really hungry. Same with an albatross. What people try to do to make it more palatable is normally to dry it. So if they've got any kind of thin lines, they can dry it in the sun, so you get a kind of seabird jerky.
I don't think I can do it. We gotta try.
Only eat it if you think it won't make you sick. If you're ill and you're sick, you lose the calories you've actually got in your stomach and the fluid that's with it, which is worse for you. But the problem with foods like that, proteins, is it takes fresh water to digest. And the bigger problem that survivors have at sea is water acquisition, because you need water far sooner than you need food. We can survive for weeks without eating, but you can't survive more than a few hours or days in scorching sun without water. So if you eat protein, it'll exacerbate the not drinking part, which is one of their major problems. But if you haven't got loads of water, don't eat the albatross. It's long enough for you to try and grab the tail away from the bitey end. What you can do, like, he's giving it a good shoeing. What you can do with sharks, if you catch a small enough one, is turn it upside down. And when you flip them upside down, they go into a tonic state, which makes their sort of, oh, what's happening? I'd give this one 10 out of 10. This is the scenario that we train our aircrew for. Surviving in a life raft at sea, where the life raft is something that's packed along with the aircraft survival kit. They are far more at risk from us than we are from them. But great whites, specifically, are very unlikely to take mammals from rocks. You see orcas do it, killer whales will do it, but you know, great white sharks is unlikely. What they're trying to do is just get easy meat. If you're on a rock, you're not easy food. Can you outswim a shark? No. Should you try? No. When sharks attack, there's not a lot you can do about it. If you're in a group, if you're huddled, try and stay together. Don't start smashing the water or doing any violent movements, because that'll attract them. You want to be unattractive to this thing. You want to look and feel like something it's not used to eating. It all depends on what kind of jellyfish, and goodness knows what they're supposed to be, but some of them are lethally dangerous, aren't they? Swim into jellyfish, the shark's definitely going to have a munch at you. Even if it's just an exploratory bite because you're bleeding, that could be enough to sever an artery and then you'll bleed out. Shark's skin's incredibly thick. The thinnest part is on the nose, so if you did have the choice, which you won't have, and you did have a weapon, which you probably won't have, and you were going to have a go, then yeah, go for it around the nose. Entertainment rating, I don't know, 7 out of 10. Realism rating, maybe a 2.
Where's the beach? Eric, wake up!
It's not uncommon for people to drift out of range of getting back into land. It's a really common way for people to get into difficulties. One of the first senses you lose in a survival situation is your sense of humour. And you know that in your mates. If they've ever had a real crisis in their life, and it's not right to joke about it, they won't joke about it. In a life raft, what you can do is take 5. Now, really difficult if you're 2 people in a 1-person raft, but if it's any other sort of scenario, either shut up for 5 minutes or just take a break, you know, just take that time out.
It should have been you! No!
Luckily, life raft knives have got a blunted end and they float, because that's the next thing that would happen.
Are you talking about killing and eating me, Frank?
Maybe I am, maybe I ain't. Rum ham.
Certainly in the accounts that I've come across from British mariners, if you're in a life raft and it's all getting a bit difficult and everyone's really, really hungry, then you're going to get, one of you is going to get eaten. And they used to draw lots in life rafts back in the day, like 1700s and so, even up until then. Normally it was the young cabin boy that got knocked on the head, so all the old sweats have probably rigged the draw, but yeah, they draw lots. You don't need to eat that urgently. We can survive for weeks without food, so yeah, cannibalism, not that high on the list.
All I'm saying is that when you go into survival mode, it's every man for himself.
What is survival mode? I don't know. And no, it's not everyone for himself. It's everyone together. Realism, 10 out of 10. So people who haven't thought about it and haven't been trained will probably react. So by trying to free the mast that was bashing into the side of the boat, she's unfortunately got tangled up in the sail that's now dragging her down. One of the things we teach pilots to do is to get away from their parachute, because it'll do exactly the same. But you can actually breathe through them. So there's a little air pocket. So she did the right thing there.
Looking good, Mama.
Duct tape's amazing, isn't it? You can fix most things with it. It's commonly put in survival packs. You've got to test somewhere first. You've got to make sure it's clean and dry. Difficult at sea, but it's a calm day, because if there's any moisture, that'll affect the adhesive. So the first thing to do is protect yourself from the hazards, which she's done. The next thing she needs to do is get rescued, be located, as we call it in military survival. So she's going right the way through it logically, and she's doing exactly the right things, try to get rescued. And then later, when she's got some kind of message for help out there, then yeah, I'll worry about water and food. What we'll tend to do is throw a line to them if they're compos mentis, but if they're unconscious or if they're further away than we can throw the line, then we'll tie it around someone's middle, just like she's done. So what she's doing is absolutely the same as we would teach people to do. She hasn't got a life preserver on, is the one thing I pick her up for on that. Pulling someone out of the water is really hard work. If they've got a buoyancy aid on, what you can do is sort of almost semi-submerge the body, and then the buoyancy will give you a kick up. But with a high-sided vessel, or a relatively high-sided vessel like that, it's really tricky. And the other problem with getting people out of the water, not a lot of folk know about hydrostatic squeeze and post-rescue collapse. Prioritising her survival options, protection, location, water and food, that gets a 10 out of 10. So, what can you do in this situation if you're these guys? If there's a massive wave like that coming straight at the boat, there's not a lot they can do. The reason he's accelerating is like when you're trying to paddle out through a big set, when you're surfing, you try and go a bit faster to get beyond it before it breaks. So, and that's about all they can do, but it's wrong place, wrong time. You can't turn a boat around fast enough if the wave's coming that quick. If you get caught sideways on, it's going to tumble and destroy it. You could try and outrun it, but it's not, that boat isn't built for speed. What could you do? Emergency position indicator beacons that will broadcast a satellite where you are, have one of those on your person, have a survival suit, have a life preserver, and if the boat becomes untenable because the sea's just too big, if you look at the top of the bridge house on the fishing boat, that white canister is a life raft. Even when the cribber's going off, when it's really big, it's nothing like that. They do happen though. There's varying theories as to what creates them. Mostly it's down around the South Africa region. There's an Antarctic current that comes up, meets the warmer water and creates this kind of enormous pitching that has broken ships in half in the past. This is a 10 out of 10. There's a Seafarers Institute for a reason, to look after the families of those who get lost at sea. It's a really, really harsh environment. It's a typical kind of scenario where people will get into trouble. There's something like 300 or 400 of those shipping containers go into the sea every year, and they just float around near the surface, so you're not going to know, especially at night. It makes total sense. When things get wet with salt water, as it evaporates, like it would do in that climate, it forms little salt crystals. He's checking out his communications equipment, and by washing it off with fresh water, that'll get rid of the salt crystals that could stop them working. He'll let it dry in the sun. He's not using loads of water. You can see he's being really careful about measuring it out, and that should make his sat phone work again later, and we can tell it's a sat phone from the antenna. If the repair works, albeit a little bit Heath Robinson, he can phone for help. but if you've been on a life raft for even a few hours, it gets uncomfortable. If you've been in one for hours, days, weeks, months, terrible. And you get to your wit's end. So in this scene, what Robert Redford's trying to do is just generate a little light. And it's difficult at night. I mean, the moon's bright behind him, and what you can do with a mirror is reflect moonlight, but it's difficult on water because all the waves, the little ripples are reflecting. So what Robert's trying to do is make a small fire, a contained fire in his raft. Now that is fraught with danger. Typically, if people run out of pyrotechnics, they're gonna scream and shout, but you can't be heard across open water. But what he could have done is, as well as packing some pyrotechnical light devices, pack a laser flare, because they're brilliant. This is not uncommon for people to have to make these really critical life-death decisions, and it's an all or nothing thing, isn't it, if it doesn't work. There's an amazing anecdote from Greenland in the war where 3 American airmen who were stranded on the coast set fire to their warm jackets in the winter, and knowing that if people saw the fire, they'd get rescued, and if they didn't, they'd freeze to death. In terms of realism, for the scene where Robert Redford makes a small fire, accidentally sets fire to his whole raft, realism 9. Lots and lots of life rafts and lifeboats have got little manuals in them. And this is one of the sort of standard diagrams that you'll see in it, like ocean currents and where the water will take you. I know it's all metaphor, but would you be able to trail behind a metal lifeboat on a section of oars and life jackets? I mean, people have survived in worse, but that is pretty clever, isn't it? Triangles are one of the strongest structures you can make. It's minimising the amount of knots he's got to tie. It's got a little bit of give in it for the sea.
Establish a strict schedule for eating, keeping watch, and getting rest.
Spot on. Getting a routine is absolutely critical. You can sense the passing of time by watching the movement of the sun. So if you put your arm out, and this is the same for all of us because our hands and our arms are about the right proportion, that's 10 degrees, which is just under an hour. 15 degrees is how much the sun moves in an hour. So you know that you've got as many of those as it is for the time of year before sunrise and sunset. So there are things you can do to keep track of time.
Do not drink urine or seawater.
Yes, never, stop. Right, everyone, are you hearing me? It will actually make you die quicker, because if you drink anything that's salty, it exacerbates the problem of dehydration.
Above all, don't lose hope.
The first point, I should say, being a proper survival geek, is never cut into metal with your knife, because it'll just blunten it. But if you go to the Imperial War Museum, not far from where we're filming this, there's a boat in there from the Anglo-Saxon we spoke about, and it's got notches in the gunnel for how long they survived at sea. And you will lose track if you haven't got some form of log, and paper will get wrecked and ruined.
My name is Zerra. I'm a survival specialist, and I've been practicing and teaching wilderness survival for over 17 years. I participated in 5 seasons of the Discovery show Naked and Afraid. Unexpected falls and falls in general are actually one of the biggest ways people die when they're in the backcountry. It doesn't always have to be a cliff face, it can just be a steep slope. It's definitely something to look out for. As far as climbing into a horse as a means of survival, it would totally work. The length of time it would work for is going to be limited. And I think the biggest mistake that he did was not taking that gut pile and cuddling it, because there's so much bacteria in guts that continue to stay alive and produce heat once the animal's already dead. So the guts are really where the heat is. There are certain kinds of clothing, like wool, that will still keep you warm and add some heat, even if they're wet. I think being naked, you're already dealing with losing heat through being wet and any gusts that are getting in through that hole. So it seems a little risky to take your clothes off if you don't have to. As he's pulling that gut pile out, he realizes it's warm. And why would you not have it at least kind of sealing up the door that you're in? I would give this clip a 7. I think that it's pretty smart. It takes a lot of guts, no pun intended, to be able to do something like this.
I've brought with me only the bare essentials, a knife, a roll of duct tape, in case I need to fashion a shelter.
I actually think someone on Naked and Afraid once brought a roll of duct tape as their survival item, and they're supposed to be professionals, so.
Take a look at this. I tented my pants. I've made myself a nice pants tent shelter.
I love that clip. I think it's clearly ridiculous, and yet at the same time, he probably did better than a lot of people in his situation would do. He was looking at what he had and trying to figure out how he could creatively use it. Now, I think taking your clothes off, like your clothes are already a shelter. They're already like your first form of shelter. So taking them off to make a secondary shelter probably isn't gonna be great. But it's better than running around in circles until you're completely dehydrated and exhausted.
Those are nature's best mushrooms. These little buggers are damn tasty as well.
Eating the mushrooms is a terrible idea. Even when mushrooms are edible, a lot of them in the wild you have to cook. So yeah, he would have died pretty quick in that situation. If it wasn't for the mushrooms, I would have given Michael's survival skills a 4, because he's at least thinking about what he needs to do and trying to be creative about it. And that's a great start. Well, he's in trouble, but how many times do wolves actually attack humans? And the answer is almost never. I think there's like a couple documented cases of that happening in North America, and I see wolves pretty much every single time I'm out in the woods. Wolves are terrified of people. If wolves wanted to hunt people, people wouldn't go in the woods because they're amazingly effective predators. They outmatch us on every physical front. They just don't have any interest. We don't look like food. If you did run into an extremely desperate wolf who was thinking about the possibility that you might be a food source, then you want to make yourself look as big as possible, put your arms up, start yelling, make some noise, kick some rocks at it. Wolves can run over 30 miles an hour, so running is gonna do nothing. I don't know who else has ever used electric tape, but it's not this rigid stuff. That stuff's just gonna end up breaking off further, probably before it penetrates the wolf's really thick fur and hide. And I could see him getting more hurt from doing that than any benefit it would serve. Creative, again, really like his mindset. He's kind of just willing to do whatever and be creative to survive. I would give this clip a 1, because you're already starting on really false pretenses. I don't like when this myth of wolves being man-eaters, man-hunters is perpetuated.
Somebody help me!
I'm really super focused at this moment on what he used for a mechanism to get that much force on that trap, because that was impressively fast and strong. There's a lot that goes into making a trap like that. Sharpening a bunch of stakes and setting them into another log, I mean, we're talking hours, and then just setting the trap and coming up with the right tension on like the mechanism that's you're using to trigger it. And then finding a place to put it. A trap only works if you have someone walk into it. So the way you get around that is either to set a lot of traps, which would take a lot of time, or by funneling the movement in, so it's not something you can just do on the fly and expect to work.
Don't push it.
Camouflage is absolutely useful in survival, whether it's, you know, in a situation where you're clearly trying to run from someone, or maybe you're just hunting. He had, I think there were hemlock branches on his back. But unless he's hiding with his back towards everyone, it's not going to be useful, because the idea is to break up the form so that you don't look like a person. And I could say the same about his face camo. Like, maybe do a better job of like working with your face to make it look less like your eyes are standing out and your eyebrows. I mean, his eyebrows were so dominant still. So creating some kind of color scheme on his face where his eyes and his eyebrows were less dominant would have done better than just like smearing stuff everywhere. I would give this a 5. Realistically, I struggle with the time invested in the trap. Accurate portrayals of survival skills in here. The hand drill is amazing, like spot on, totally would work. I think the biggest problem I have is When you're trying to forge, it's really hard to get a temperature that's high enough to forge metal when you're using wood. I think a wood fire can burn at about 900 or so degrees. You need about 1500 to start moving metal. Otherwise, to get the metal that hot seems really unlikely to me. If I'm in a survival situation and I don't have a knife, I will use stone all the time. It's obviously ideal if you have a steel knife, but by adapting the way that you do things, a stone knife or stone tools can actually accomplish the same tasks. Dealing with metal requires so many specific things that stone's gonna work for whoever you need to kill or whatever task you need to accomplish. I basically just want a knife that has an edge that is gonna be able to carve wood. So for traps, for skinning animals, having a smaller knife, anything where you're carving or doing fine, intricate work, something smaller is gonna be better. I would give this clip probably an 8 out of 10. I think it was really surprisingly accurate. The one thing was the fire. Oh, another example of animals just being out to get you in the most dramatic fashion. I'm really glad that the wild is not like that, because I would be dead 1,000 times over. Grizzly attacks are definitely more common than wolf attacks, and it can happen. Usually a grizzly is attacking in a defensive situation. Either you surprised it, there's a mother and cub situation. Basically, you got too close and it wants to get you away. It's not gonna hunt you and consume you per se. It's just trying to get you on the ground so you're not moving, and then it's gonna take off and run away. Normally, I think it would be more a case of that happening when it was a single person walking along versus like a whole group around a fire, but it can happen.
Stay back!
Depending on where the bear is, a lot of times they're pretty used to fire if they're coming into camp and they're used to stealing food. I have a hard time thinking that if you have a log that's burning with embers at the end and you're shoving it into a bear's eye, that it's not going to at least slow him down a little bit. I wouldn't just wave it in his face. I think that's where they messed up a little bit. And everyone else, like, throw some stuff at him. They didn't even make contact. If they're gonna stay and fight, then fight. If it was a situation where you surprise the bear and the bear starts attacking and it's just trying to get away from you, then that's when you wanna play dead. Stop moving, don't move until the bear is long gone. Try to be in areas where you can see further than, 20 feet and carry bear spray. I would give this scene a 1. Not saying it doesn't happen, but this was very unrealistic, and the way they responded was just like, come on, there's better things you guys could have done.
Ben!
First of all, is that Kate Winslet? Which is just funny that she didn't find a door this time to float on. There's a lot of things I'm not buying in this clip. She basically falls through a perfect hole of ice. I really struggle with the fact that the second she hits the water, she's just peacefully passed out. There's no struggle, there's no hyperventilating. Is she just like one of those fainting goats who comes into a bad situation and is no longer conscious? That's what it felt like watching this. She was immediately just out. And it can happen. You can pass out, you can hyperventilate, breathe water, whatever, but it happens so soon. How did he find her in there? It's obviously deep water, and she apparently just is comprised of mostly fat underneath her clothes because she was so buoyant. It seemed very improbable for someone to just float back to the surface and not float away to the sides of the hole and be able to be grabbed. He had to run so far to get to that hole, and her body is just right there. It's a little too convenient for me to be okay with. When he was pulling her body out of the ice, it was good that at least his body was kind of spread out. His body weight wasn't just centered on the edge. I would rate this clip probably a 1. I just don't understand any of it. If I'm trying to learn an area, I will absolutely bring some kind of book to help me identify what I'm looking at, whether it be plants, animal tracks, things like that. It's super useful to learn. It's also very limited. You might get one picture at one time of the year of a plant, so to just have one resource and then use it to consume something that could potentially kill you, in my opinion, isn't a great idea. Out in the wild, you just have to be really careful. You are not going to be consuming something that you're not 100% certain of its identity. It's a really bad idea. And furthermore, you're probably not getting that many calories. It's not going to be the matter between life or death. You can't really exist off of the few meager calories you're going to get from a lot of plant foods. So to run the risk of eating it, not knowing 100%, it's like a risk versus reward thing, and it loses out every time. You really can get into trouble very quickly, and there's certain things you can do that will really increase that. There's very few things you can actually control, but what you put in your body is one of those. So don't mess around with anything that you can't identify 100%. I would give this clip a 10. Honestly, it's definitely something that can and did happen.
What? You swim!
This is a remarkably unsmoky fire. Wildfires can travel really fast. They can basically travel as fast as the wind. That being said, it really seemed to be traveling on the ground a lot, and it didn't look like there was any brush there to catch on fire. But it can happen, and fires are super scary, and being caught in one would be like absolutely terrible. If you can, getting upwind of that fire, trying to, figure out the direction it's moving in and kind of move perpendicular to it and get out of the path of it, because the smoke can take you out. Anyone who's ever stood in campfire smoke, you know what that's like. A forest fire would clearly be way worse. Carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, all these nasty things. You basically just want to get out of its path if you can. Sometimes that's kind of impossible, and there's unfortunately a lot of stories where people have been caught in situations like this and didn't make it out, even highly trained people.
Listen to me. Take a deep breath, hold it, and lay back.
I've actually read about people who've survived wildfires by being in pools or bodies of water, and kind of the key thing is that you want it to be deep enough that it's going to cover your whole body and not just immediately get too hot. The flames can actually pass over the top of the water, so if your body's sticking out, it can definitely be a bad situation. The problem with deep water would be, getting exhausted or just passing out and drowning. But in certain circumstances, it could definitely work. I think it really looked like their only option, and people have definitely done it and survived. I think the one thing I would have done differently would be wetting an item of clothing, and then when I did have to come up and surface, you have a wet piece of clothing over your face so it's cooling down that air, because that air is going to be super heated. Like, that goes into your lungs, and even if there's not smoke, just the super hot air can burn the inside of your lungs. That cool cloth over your face is going to not only protect your face from any falling embers, but it's going to cool down the air and just keep your skin cool as well. I would probably give this scene a 7. There's a lot of things with the fire I have trouble with, but they did try. They put thought into it. This could work. It's better than nothing, but there were ways it could have been improved.
No!
Ice is funny, so you can't always tell the thickness of ice. You want it to be at least 4 inches to support your body weight. And there's a few factors that make it more dangerous, whether it's still or moving water, where it is, if it has snow on top, which can actually insulate it like a blanket and prevent it from becoming really thick. If you look at ice, generally if it's clear, then it's going to be thick, but if it's kind of that milky color, it means it's gone through processes of thawing and freezing and probably isn't that thick or safe. And if you do have to go out on it, you don't want to be running. What you have is your entire body weight coming down hard and fast on one point that's small. So if you had to cross something, getting flat, spreading your body weight out, there's a million ways they could have done it. There's definitely a risk of wet clothing. If they were to swim across and everything got wet and they couldn't start a fire, they could be in a bad situation. Being way back then, I think a lot of it would have been wool clothing, which actually will keep you warm when it's wet. It's not ideal to have it be wet. You're not gonna have as much as the insulating properties, but you'd still be okay if you were moving, and they could just keep moving until their body heat dried their clothes out. People die in a few minutes in cold water. It's not from hypothermia, it's from going into that shock and drowning, or losing mobility in their limbs and drowning. I would give the accuracy of this a 1. I think the biggest movie myth in wilderness survival is that it's always something big and dramatic that's coming and trying to get you. And in real survival, it's not like that. It's the little things, it's the hypothermia, it's dehydration, but it's not as exciting as a grizzly bear.
I'm Hazen Audell. Currently, I have a show called Primal Survivor on National Geographic and Disney+. I've been practicing bushcraft, outdoor survival for over 30 years now.
Keep your arms above the surface. When the kid comes back, grab on.
That could happen about that fast. When I was watching them sink, that can be realistic. It just depends on the viscosity of the quick mud or the quicksand. The deeper and thicker it is, the more you suck into it, and it's harder to get out. You're gonna need your hands to try to swim out or use them to try to pull yourself out of the sand. If they were to just pull you out without you moving your legs, it almost gets worse. There's more suction. So what you want to do is sort of swim and wiggle your legs to try to move around that matrix of water, mud, and grit and try to get it to turn into a slushy so it'll pull you out. By asking for assistance, that was a good thing. So that's why I at least give it a 3.
Piranha. Better eat them before they eat you.
That is the great thing about piranhas. They are an abundant fish, and they're very easy to catch because you just need some sort of a meat source and then a hook. And that's generally the first thing you're going to catch. Catching a piranha with a net is pretty slim, but there's a lot of catfish and other kinds of fish that are really sluggish. The thing about piranhas and piranha behavior is that they kind of read off of each other's behavior. So if one fish gets really excited, takes a bite, there's blood in the water, there's that scent in the water, it'll start exciting other fish, and pretty soon it starts to become a chain reaction. There's well over 20 different species of piranha in the Amazon, all specialists in eating different ways, but the most dangerous one are the red-bellied piranhas, and which is probably what they're trying to depict here. That is fairly realistic. It would start as one piranha, and then it would be hundreds of piranha. You'd get the out of that water, that's for sure. I would rate this clip as a 7. You have to kind of look at the probability of this happening. That sort of almost wives' tale of you being devoured by piranha in water, it's just incredibly remote. When you talk about the Amazon, it's such a vast area. There's a lot of scenarios, a lot of different kinds of rivers, but there are certainly rivers that are like that and really muddy like that too, and rocky that have that would be really difficult to navigate. I could see that the watercraft that they had built was out of necessity. The thing to keep in mind is when you build a watercraft like that, they do float, but they can still weigh hundreds, if not thousands of pounds. So they're by no means agile. How that raft hit the rock was very realistic. Wrapping around the rock, that's a really dangerous scenario. If that was your last-ditch effort to avoid going off a big waterfall or going through some rapids that you knew you wouldn't be able to survive, that's what you would have to do. They were lucky in that when that raft hit, they were on the backside of the raft. A lot of times, usually the raft will go like this, and then the water will push it this way. You're on this way, so you're between the rock and the raft with all that raging water pressing against, and then you drowned or you get crushed to death. It helps out if you were experienced and you knew what you were doing, and if you were purposeful about it, they probably did the right thing. You're not ever going to be able to swim against the current. You just have to understand the rapids, understand the eddy lines, and try to get to shore the best you can, understanding that you're still going to get swept down the current. I was a professional whitewater guide for many years, so that was all par for the course. Well, the biggest killer out there when you're out in a survival situation, number one killer is exposure. But another big killer is just by getting yourself in trouble and injuring yourself and dying of trauma. So when you do things like, for example, climb a big tree, you fall out of the tree, you're gonna get damaged and hurt. So if you can shake the fruit off of a tree, if you can get a big branch or a rock and try to hit the fruit out of the tree and have it go safely to the ground, that's your best bet. Sometimes that's not always the scenario, and if you're desperate for food, you take desperate measures. The reason why I love the Amazon is every single nook and cranny has something living in it. I'm a guy that loves snakes. I'm a little bit of a sicko. I can usually tell right away what kind of snake it is and if it poses a danger. They were showing it as aggressive, it was striking, but it was a python, so it wasn't gonna pose any danger. If it was a poisonous snake, like maybe a fertilans or something, you just wanna stay the out of its striking range, for sure. Everything I saw was very plausible. I could understand why they were doing what they were doing. I would rate this clip as a 10. Traps are a very common way of bringing meat to the table in remote areas, especially in the jungle. There's so many animals around, so many different options of things to catch. To make a trap as effective as it could be, it needs to be very well hidden, just like you see there in that clip. I have seen traps where it's going to take multiple people to be able to bend down a branch or a tree. That's a rare scenario because they're going to be wanting to be catching something pretty big, the size of a cow, a tapir, or something like that. The thing about trapping is you have to know where to set the trap, you have to know animal behavior, you have to know the species that are around, and then you develop a trap based on what you're trying to catch. Once you get the animal stuck in the trap, you have to make sure the animal's going to stay there until you get there. I didn't see all the details of this trap, but I would give it a 7. In the modern world, they try to stay away from sort of any kind of wild water. Everybody seems to be really scared of it. But in a desperate situation like that, you're trying to get any little bits of water as you can. This is pretty realistic based on, for example, remote islands like that are out in the South Pacific. The only fresh water is water that's been collecting on leaves from the dew or rain, and that is the only place where you're going to be able to get water. So in that clip, that was a very realistic scenario. And to collect it in a vessel, like a coconut, is a very realistic scenario. There's actually thousands of people that live in this sort of same environment, indigenous people that have no fresh groundwater, so they're totally reliant on water that's collecting from dew on leaves and also rainwater. I have 2 very good friends that were the survival expert consultants on this film. So based on their expertise and experience, they implemented it into this film. This clip is the strongest clip I've seen as far as realism, and I rate this clip a 10.
Yeah. Okay,
I actually like seeing that clip because it brings back good old memories. I have been in scenarios where I've gone through water where I wasn't thinking that there were leeches and had leeches that same size on me. I was in the jungles of Laos one time, and there were leeches that were that big. And I've had some that were on me that were about 8 inches long.
Ah, no!
Stop,
What is that? Stop. Maybe the jumpsuit scared him off. I don't know.
If you wear tighter clothes, it would be difficult to have a leech because the leech really has to make contact with your skin. Leeches have sort of a 3-part tooth system, so it has to be able to get onto that latch, onto your skin, make skin contact, and then dig those 3 teeth into your skin. They have a saliva that makes it so you can't feel what they're doing.
Don't make that sound.
Trying to like picking anchovies off my Caesar salad.
Generally, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey and give her a hard tug. Once you pull them off, it is truly just a bloody mess. And sometimes you'll be bleeding for half the day afterwards, after a good big leech bite like that. That is a 10. That is very possible. Those are very realistic looking leeches. To make a parachute work, you're pretty well strapped in. You're usually going to stay suspended up in the branches, and then you have to cut your way or unbuckle yourself out. A lot of trees, plants, shrubs are trying to protect themselves from being eaten, so they have thorns, barbs. Being snagged by little thorns and big thorns is sometimes a daily event. You want to leave it in place and try to get medical attention. If you don't have anybody there to help you, and you're not going to be able to get medical attention for weeks maybe, you're probably going to have to do something about that and get it out of you. You got to kind of look at it like pulling the plug, and then you can bleed to death coming out of that puncture wound. So I think she'd be even in more pain than what is portrayed. So I think it'd be a stretch to give it a 3.
You got a good pair of walking shoes?
During the wet season, it'll rain like that every day. It depends on where you're at in the Amazon. It can range anywhere from about 3 months to 6 months generally. Mudslides and landslides are very frequent in the jungle. Anywhere where there's a big slope like that, there's so much rain like that that the land just gives way. I've been closest to this sort of scenario just by being on big roads and then having the road washed away. Actually, I have a big scar in my leg from a big rock slide, which was a kind of a landslide. More than likely, you're gonna at least get pretty cut up. I give this clip a 5. Before humans figured out a way to make steel and copper and metal, their only cutting implements were from bone, teeth, and sharp rocks. So those, they look like vines, but they're actually roots. A lot of people, it's kind of a misnomer when they talked about Tarzan swinging from vines. It's actually, oftentimes those are roots coming from epiphytic plants that are living on top of the branches of other trees. And they send these big, long roots to go down and get water and access the dirt down below. If you're familiar with the rainforest, you know what works best for different scenarios. You know where the strongest ropes and strongest roots are by how they look. It's kind of like people that live in the city. They know that that little Toyota is not a fast car, but a Ferrari is a very fast car. People can see the rainforest like that. That's just all comes from familiarity of being outside. You recognize what a strong piece of wood is as opposed to a rotten branch. So vines and roots, if you get the right kinds, they're really strong and make very quick and dirty rope, just like that. This is actually grass. It's twisted and splied together to be able to make a really strong rope. This is another very strong fiber that could easily support body weight, but this is bark that's peeled off of a tree. I got this out of Guyana, which is very close to the Amazon.
Yeah!
Mowgli made that clip look really easy to try to be able to get those bees like that. You could go there and kick the hive off like that. I mean, you would get stung almost to death being unprotected like that, and especially without use of smoke. So in that scenario, it was unrealistic. Just holding onto a rope like that, if you did wind up getting yourself into honey, it'd be a sticky, slippery mess, making it even more dangerous. I give this clip a 4. Using blowguns is fairly common with a bunch of different tribes. There's poison on this tip right here. In some places it's even more common than using a bow and arrow. Probably easiest way to think about it is like a giant high-performance spitwad. The longer of a blowgun that you have, the straighter a poison arrow is going to fly through the air. They fly incredibly fast, and also since they're so small, they can go through leaves, they can go through branches. They're a lot smaller than a big arrow that typically gets locked up in leaves and branches in the canopy. So they're, in some places, they're the favored hunting instrument. Well, when you're talking about the Amazon, there are thousands of different trees, plants, shrubs. Every single one of those has a use. A lot of them have chemical properties that can be used not only as hallucinogens, but also have chemical properties that we've incorporated into our modern medicine. I've seen similar ritualistic plants being used like this in Colombia, Venezuela, and Brazil. No, you wouldn't be able to catch a fish this easily with a spear. The best way is to sneak up on a fish, so you have to be quiet. A lot of times in a canoe, you have somebody in the back paddling, and then the marksman, the person with the spear, is out in the front. You can spear them while they're sleeping. I rate this clip at a 6. My favorite scene that I got to watch today was that scene with romancing the stone, because I remember that as a child, and that only increased my intrigue about going to the rainforest myself. And since I went there myself, it's been probably the most significant thing I have going on in my life.
Hey everybody, I'm Les Stroud, also known as Survivor Man, and for well over 35 years, I've been studying, training, and teaching survival throughout the world. Showing the difference between the sunny sky that you're in and the sandstorm overtaking that as a big dark cloud, to me, is very realistic. It is blocking out all of the light. It's what happens when we have smog and smoke from fires. Things get dark. They are getting them right. The sandstorm happens incredibly quickly. Think about when a hurricane comes in or a tornado comes in. It's the same thing with sand. You can have the same wind speeds, and this is a wall of sand, and it's coming in at you, and it's coming in fast. Tom here puts on some glasses and a makeshift scarf that he steals as he's running through the market. You do what you've got to do, and that is actually the key to survival. It's not about what's better or what's best or what's not as good. What is working right now? And for this character, he was lucky to have goggles, and he covered his face any way he could. Your air intake on your vehicle is going to be sucking up all that sand, and it's going to choke out your engine in your vehicle. So that, I think, is the harsher reality of trying to drive in the middle of a sandstorm. I'd rate this clip a 6 out of 10 because the depiction of the moving sand truthfully captured what you might actually see. That is not the way that I would travel through the desert on any given day. Just traipsing up a sand dune, back down it, along the ridges. Those dunes can be easily the size of apartment complexes or city towers. They can be massive. It is difficult to walk on sand dunes. It's like walking in some kind of weird snow. You just, every step forward is a slide back. And the trick in traversing the sand dunes really is looking for that path of least resistance, which is not always going all the way up to the top. The beauty of most wilderness areas, whether it's the ocean or the middle of a desert, is that star expanse. And it is far more illuminating than you'd ever give it credit for. You can literally walk in the night through the desert and see exactly where you're going without any moon, just with the starlight. If you can't do it at night and you need some daylight, fine. Early in the morning, that's going to be your best bet. Once you get to mid-morning and even late day, it's just too hot. The tripping and the stumbling when it comes to all of our favorite heroes and actors as they try to walk on sand dunes. That's all Hollywood. You don't succumb that way. And then if you do trip and fall, you don't just go rolling on down a big dune like that. You do that if you want to. You make a sport out of it. It's a recreational activity. But if you're succumbing, that's not the way it happens. I'd rate this clip at 3 out of 10. 3 because it's just kind of silly. I'm not really certain they got it right at all. And the reason for that is quicksand primarily exists at riverbeds, estuaries, close to the ocean. That's where you get your quicksand. This particular scene is set right in the middle of the desert, where everything is completely bone dry, and yet he just drops into it kind of magically. That stuff is so thick. You're not just lifting your arm up saying, oh, let me die. Just leave me here. That's not happening. Not when he was already up to his neck and just barely sort of breathing. My first move in falling into quicksand is immediate, and that is this, real simple. Don't panic. That's the first thing you do. When you can't move your body, insane, intense claustrophobia, because you can't move. It's like you're tied. So you have to breathe and not panic, and then think about, okay, how do I slowly and cautiously get my body back from being vertical to being horizontal and slither my way out of this? And you end up using, it's like your fingers become like little grappling hooks. You just want to do this. It's literally an inch at a time. Even to pull somebody else out requires a lot of leverage. In this case, he had a horse, so he had the leverage. Falling into quicksand can be a very slow death. If you really can't pull yourself out from all that suction, it doesn't mean you're also going straight down instantly. People have been stuck in quicksand for minutes, for hours, and even days. It can take a while. I'd give this scene about a 3 out of 10. It's the wrong ecosystem. His portrayal being stuck in the sand was just a little too over the top. The thing I love so much about this movie and this particular scene is the realism of his desperate attempt to get a little bit of rainwater with his water bottle. He's holding it up, trying to get these drops. And that feeling, I know, that feeling of dehydration where just a bit of rain would give me some relief. Flash flooding in the desert is not to be underestimated. It's incredibly dangerous. It happens very quickly. You're rarely prepared for it. And I have seen a canyon go from a trickle to 10 to 15 or even a wall of 20 feet of water in a very short period of time. And when I say short period of time, I don't mean days. I mean hours or minutes. It's scary, and it does happen all the time in the deserts. The way to prepare for flash flooding is knowledge ahead of time. What's going on with the weather outside of the area you're in? Because the flash flooding doesn't occur, usually, from the rain that you're standing in that moment. It happens miles away in some kind of thunderstorm that's going on in a mountain range. It all gathers and starts coming down through all these creeks and cracks and crevices to be right where you are, and that's why it ends up being a wall of water when it's coming at you. I'd rate this scene 9 out of 10. The depiction of the rapid flooding and his desperation in the beginning of that to just try to get a few little drops of water, I thought was spot on.
I mean, shouldn't we keep walking? It's cooler at night.
Mike in this scene is trying to create a solar still. In my opinion, he's doing it really badly. The concept of a solar still is that you encase materials such as plants, or even you could have salt water from an ocean, and then you cover it over in the heat of the sun, and you have a cup there, and you have this taut material across the top with a weight in the middle, and then you get the condensation on the underside of that tarp. It trickles along, hits the center, drips down into the cup. It's very, very difficult. It's very time-consuming. And the reality is, in this scene, they do it just before nightfall. It doesn't work at night. It's something that has to happen during the day in the sun. So that's why, they're not getting a pass on this particular scene. They did it wrong. I've done it exactly like the scene that they show here. I've done it at the edge of the ocean on many occasions. And after 24 hours, I maybe have collected an ounce at best in perfect conditions.
I'd go easy on that.
When it comes to conserving water in the desert, the reality is you can't. And so if you only have a limited amount, the best thing you can do is actually consume it and carry it in your bladder rather than trying to ration little tiny amounts of water. Rationing food is one thing. Rationing water is something else altogether. If you have copious amounts of water, then great. Ration it out, plan it out. You can last without food for about 10 days, but in the case of water, you're good for about 3 days. After 3 days, you can't function. So the urine question. I know that there are certain survivalists who have said, oh, it works, it works. The way it works, first of all, is primarily psychological. So it's a matter of you're putting liquid in your mouth. But you have to remember all of those toxins that are coming out of your body are coming out often through your urine. So you're toxifying your own self when you ingest it. Secondly, and this is an important point here, when films and many survival shows want to portray drinking your own urine, you look at what they've collected, and they're peeing like a racehorse. When you're dehydrated, you dribble, and it's tawny brown.
I got 2 of these. You want one? No, thanks. Gets cold fast.
This is the paradox of the desert, that you can freeze to death, and that's going to be at night. So during the day, it's insanely hot, and so the heat just dissipates very quickly, and it gets very, very cold, to the point of frost on the ground. I don't want to underestimate the value of a space blanket. They do serve a purpose. They can literally save a life. They can be warm. I've found the better way to use them is to actually create them into a shelter. And if you create a shelter and use it that way and then crawl in, I found that actually works better than trying to wrap it around my body when they're all crinkly. And the type that you want to have is the type that you can't tear. The ones I see Mike and Saul using, you could rip them open accidentally just by stepping on them the wrong way. I'm going to give these survival clips a 5 out of 10. They showed a lot of cool things to do. Solar still. They brought up the concept of drinking your own urine. When you're in the expanse of any desert and all you want is a break from the sun, then anything is a break. It's incredible the difference in temperature from being under a few slats of wood or being out in the sun. That difference can be massive. Finding a safe place to sleep in the desert is really going to be a matter of options. You go with the best option you can come up with. If you can make a grass mat and sleep on that, you do that. If you can be on a rock outcropping that is smooth and comfortable, as much as rocks can be comfortable, but it was heated during the day, then you do that. The thing that you don't really have to worry about so much are the creepy crawlies. To some extent. It doesn't mean that a scorpion might not go up your pant leg. When I'm sleeping in the desert, if I take my boots off, I hang them upside down, or I put them on a stick upside down so that I don't have scorpions going up in them. If I have my pant legs and they're loose, I'll tuck them in with my socks so nothing goes in my pant legs. He was supposed to be asleep, but he was holding his hands in front of the chest. You don't do that while you're sleeping.
There's bugs. That must mean there's water.
When you start to see any kind of life, insect life, wildlife, plant life, it usually indicates there's got to be water somewhere. That's where they all survive themselves. The insects, the creepy crawlies, the flying birds, the walking mammals. The other thing you look for in the desert, it's simply plant life. Growth, trees, greenery. And generally speaking, the landscape is brown and gray and dry, but you see a little bit of greenery over there, that's the place to go and check for water.
There we go.
This is absolutely a place you could find water. I have found the cleanest water to drink halfway up a mini mountain in the middle of a Mexican desert. And I could plunge down into it and drink it, and it's safe. Sometimes that's because it's a rain catch, and sometimes it's because it's bubbling up as a spring from the ground. The problem with water is that people are quite afraid of it, to the point where they won't drink and they'll become dehydrated. But the reality is that most of the places we're going to be is going to have water that, in the worst case scenario, has Giardia. And Giardia is a waterborne parasite. You aren't going to feel it for 7 days. And then when you do, you take some pills and it's gone. And so that fear of, is water safe to drink, unfortunately is over pushed in the face of dying from dehydration, which is much worse. I'd rate this scene about an 8 out of 10. As far as the clothing you're going to wear when you're in the desert, the opposite of what you might think is what is the reality. In fact, more clothing is better. And the reason for that is convection. In a dry desert wind, all of the moisture is sucked out of your body. And it's actually your clothing that can keep that in. Same thing for the head. Sunburn, you can be scorched pretty quickly in the desert. So covering your head and covering your body is actually a real good idea in the desert. I think that caves are so overplayed when it comes to survival because most of the time caves are dank, they're damp, they're musty, they're filled with creepy crawlies. The floors are jagged and rocky. There's no place to sit, let alone lie down. So we often get this beautiful Hollywood image of a cave for surviving in. Those caves are few and far between. The wet ones that are not appealing at all when it comes to survival are much more common. There are a lot of caves in certain areas of the desert that are quite nice to survive in. The thing that you have to worry about sometimes in caves, actually, and strangely, is what you're breathing in. Because there are an awful lot of rodents that hang out in caves. And those rodents, such as mice that might carry hantavirus, are pooping. And when they poop, you're breathing in all that dust and that manure or bat guano, and that can knock you down really quickly if you get a real bad lung infection. I'd rate this scene a 3. It's pretty hard to judge a scene that is based on so much fiction. The way he catches the lizard in this scene is a little unrealistic. The reality is lizards are quite fast. They don't amble about. The proper way to get a lizard is with what we call a switch, where you have a long stick and you sort of whack it like that, and you really want to dispatch the creature before you go down and pick it up and take it off and eat it. There are a lot of creatures that you can eat in the desert, but you do need to know which ones are poisonous or not. When it comes to something like desert insects, is it brightly colored? Is it, advertising to you that, hey, I'm poisonous, look at all my fancy colors? Is it moving along slowly along the sand like it doesn't care about anybody? Why is it doing that? Probably because it's poisonous, and most of the other creatures know, yeah, don't eat that guy. That slow-moving millipede, he's poisonous. These are methods of learning about the insects or even the plants, for example, and figuring out whether or not something is poisonous or edible.
During the hot summers, we used to suck on small stones like these. Made us feel less thirsty.
If you pick up a stone and you suck on it, it has a way of stimulating saliva to be produced in your mouth, and that's what you want. And so it's not doing much of anything for your actual physiological dehydration, but psychologically, it's a great help. It's so cliche that in the desert, people always just fall face first. Most of the time, what we do is we go, oh, I gotta sit down. And then we sit down, and I'm feeling woozy, and then we faint. But of course, Hollywood's got to make it happen within 4 seconds, so we fall face first. I'd rate this scene an 8 out of 10.
Ain't no use there, kid.
With every survival book you read, they show an image of somebody digging down in the desert to get water. I've tried it so many times, and I've never found water yet. You got to remember, when it comes to desert survival, you always have to weigh the effort you put into something against the something you're going to get.
Only water we're gonna get's right over here. Ain't the best water, and it'll take time.
Here we go, the barrel cactus trick. Once again, we look at a survival cliche when it comes to the barrel cactus, that you can get water out of a barrel cactus. Yes or no? Well, the answer is yes, you can.
There's only one species of barrel cactus that is somewhat safe for humans to drink from, the fishhook barrel cactus. Other species of barrel cactus are somewhat toxic and can cause diarrhea.
The reality is that if you do it right away, it's awful. It's terrible tasting. But what this character gets right is that it isn't going to taste great and it's going to take a long time. That is the reality of a barrel cactus. People think you can just cut it open and start drinking. That's not the way it works. It takes a long time to get water out of a barrel cactus because the water's not just readily available just there in a pool. It's water within the fibers of the plant itself. And I've done it where I've squeezed it into my mouth, drops at a time, and even that does not taste good. But it can keep you alive. I'd rate this clip 8 out of 10. I would say my favorite desert survival scene was Better Call Saul. Not because they got it right. What they did, they didn't get right. But it was almost like one of my own shows where they were showing you examples of what you could do and should do to survive. They didn't do it well, but they were still showing them.
I'm Dwayne Fields, a polar explorer. I've spent so many years traveling in and doing work and carrying out expeditions in the Arctic regions, and the first black man from Britain to have walked to the magnetic North Pole.
Take deep breaths, Doc.
He's saying, take a deep breath. What you want to do is slow your breathing down, control your breathing. It stops you from panicking. What you do is you get your arms out, you kick your legs, and you wiggle your body up onto the ice, unless he's got an injury where he can't kick.
You might take the rope. Go to Doc.
He seems relatively calm despite the shock that he would be feeling. I've done exercises where I've thrown myself into a hole in ice just to get you accustomed to the feeling and the shock. You get in there, you dip yourself down. Now you can talk to me because now I've brought everything down to a slower pace.
She's coming to you.
You're putting another body, whether it's a dog's body, a human body, another body in danger. If the dog falls through the ice, it's gonna panic. It might cause the ice to crack more. He's also 8, maybe 9 meters away. He could easily throw the rope that distance and save risking the dog's life. Some of the best trained dogs in the world still only follow one command. Go left, go right, go straight, go down, come back, sit, jump. In terms of put this over Doc's head and shoulder, that's not realistic, let's be honest. If I'd walked across some ice and someone behind me fell through the ice, I'd assume that there's a weakness there. My first thing is lay down, spread myself as flat as I can, get a board, get a piece of a branch, anything to spread my weight and to assist a rescue. Throw the rope to the person. I wouldn't go towards them. I'd give it a 6 because, like most people, who doesn't want a well-trained dog? What they're hoping for is that sample of ice has trapped bubbles of air, which gives them an idea of what the atmosphere was like at the time. You don't know what the extent of it's going to be. It does crack. It's a sound. If the crack starts to form, you get away from the crack. You raise the alarm and you get away from the crack. What I found was we'd go to sleep in the tent on, a bit of frozen ocean, and we'd wake up to small sounds, and only when it's silent, there isn't much wind, can you hear these slight cracking, and it almost sounds echoey as it echoes and resonates through the ice itself. Grabs the samples that he's collected. It looks like 4 or 5 of them. Now, these things aren't light. You cannot jump a 12-foot, 10-foot gap carrying, 20, 25 kilos. You can't do it. Not gonna happen. Not in the foggiest. Can't imagine he would have been sat in the office tent, and thought, oh, I'll just keep my ice axe on me. I've kept it in my bag to the side or at the back of my bag. Generally, I don't keep it around my waist unless I'm using it at that point. If I'm climbing an ice wall for usage, recreational usage, or when I go for a walk in, you know, high altitude or snowy terrain, I'll carry one in case you slip. You can use it to stop yourself. I generally don't walk around with an ice axe on me. But the ice itself is what's holding you. As long as it's cold enough, the ice is hard enough, it will hold your weight. They were made of wood with maybe a steel tip. Nowadays, they're made of aluminium mostly, so they're super lightweight, super strong. You could comfortably support yourself, and I'd give it a 4. Entertainment value, it's an entertainment film. She's holding something which is metal with a exposed skin. You don't want to do that in the cold. What happens is your skin is always going to be slightly warmer than the thing that you're touching. That thin layer of moisture on your skin or warmth on your skin will melt the ice on the metal object. Just slightly, so you almost get stuck to it. Normally what you do is you'd allow it to warm up. You'd warm it up slowly using, and arguably people say don't use hot water. Other people say use warm water. That looks like advanced frostbite. If it wasn't frostbite and it was frost nip, you might see some discoloration. You might feel some numbness, some stinging maybe. I had my goggles on, which was perfect. I had a bit of material just covering the goggle, and it was just rubbing on my nose. And where that material got so cold, the end of my nose turned darker and peeled off. The outer layers of skin were dead. With frostbite, the cold causes all the cells to burst. It's a cell wall is burst, that cell's dead, it's useless. The skin cells there all the way through to the nerve endings.
Nothing? I'm gonna have to amputate these fingers.
No way.
Get them taken off as quickly as possible, prevent further damage. It really does get like that. They start to change color. It goes from maybe a pale color to a dark blue. Then it starts to get darker and darker until it turns black. Now, the way you can avoid it is we layer up as many layers as you can. Give that scene a solid, 8, 9 out of 10. Oh, I like that. He's taken shelter in this natural formation, a cave of some sort, and it looks like he's piled up the snow at the entrance to keep the air inside warm, which is a good idea, but you should be careful because you don't want the carbon dioxide to build up. Polar bears are brilliant hunters. They've got one of the best senses of smell in the natural kingdom. And you can hear it outside, taking big breaths in. And that's a telltale sign. It's walking around, sniffing the air, tracking down where that smell's coming from. Remember, these things are used to hunting seal and finding carcasses washed up on beaches from miles away. Normally, they'd find a seal underneath the ice, they'll dig it out, take the young, take the seal, and that's their meal. So it's doing exactly what it would normally do there. Exactly what you're supposed to do. Loads of noise, be ready to defend yourself if you have to, and use the flare. People do get attacked by polar bears. It happens. They tend to happen nearer settlements, or it tends to happen when a polar bear is either ill, finds it difficult to hunt. I'll give this one a solid 9 out of 10.
No, thank you. I like these better.
You can see some frost starting to form on his jacket. And I think I can see a little bit forming on his moustache as well. So that's pretty accurate. You don't want to stop for a main meal every 2 or 3 hours. So what you do is you have a bag with food. The calorific content is very high, and you put your hand in your pocket, chop that in your mouth every so often. Now, inevitably, you're going to get someone who eats a lot more than you. And part of a team dynamic is you stop and you share out whatever you've got. Now, if everyone does that, it balances out over the day or over the week.
Pizza. Cheeseburgers.
Sometimes when I'm out, I look forward to having a jelly baby at the next allocated stop that me or my team have decided. It could be any treat. Just having something to look forward to, it helps you take that next step. So I think that's spot on. When I first went to the Arctic, I think 2-3 days before the end, we'd been walking for about 22 days was the total journey time. We'd been walking for about 19 hours. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, I'm hungry. And as soon as I said that, my mind started to think about a chicken biryani and a lamb korma that I'd had 3 weeks earlier. So I kept looking at my teammates saying, oh gosh, it's like I can almost smell it.
We keep going that direction.
Polar winds, it feels agonizing. When you see these images of people in polar extremes and they've got their eyes, around their eyes are blistering up and their lips are cracked, it's the wind for the most part that's doing that. Having one huge jacket is good, but the best option is have multiple layers to trap multiple layers of air. He doesn't have any goggles on. Luckily, the little girl, I think it is, does have goggles on. And it must be so scary to think that you can't open your eyes to try and navigate using whatever tools are available. What looks like snow or mist, or it looks like mist, it's actually snow. It's called spindrift. And that's the wind kicking up a small amount of snow and making it swirl and blow past. Generally, at about 10-15 kilometers, it will start picking up bits of snow. So you can almost tell roughly what the wind speed is by how much snow is being moved along and how high up that is. The details, such as the frost, I'd say I'd give it a solid 8, maybe 8.5 out of 10.
Observe my signals. One pull on the tube means half a fathom slack.
It just instantly brought me back to the books I've read about Shackleton and Scott and, you know, ships being stuck in Antarctica over winter because they'd become trapped in the ice and then burning bits of the ship just to keep warm.
There should be a surgeon here.
They're just below, Mr. Collins.
Cold water, your body loses temperature about 20 to 25 times quicker. He's using what looks like a spear to chisel away at the ice. At this time in history, there weren't any tried and tested methods for stuff like this. It was you did what you had to do using the tools that you had to hand. I've read accounts of people chopping away at the ice using a pickaxe, you know, tying ropes to ships and pulling them backwards and then pulling them forwards again and taking a different route and, you know, using the dogs to pull and going ahead and breaking up the ice ahead of the ship. With modern ships, they've got hardened hulls. So the hulls may be twice as thick. It's made of steel. It's ready for impacting ice. They've got powerful engines that can break the ice up. They've got radar to detect the thickness of the ice. I think the Arctic has this mysticism about it where we like familiarity. The thing with the Arctic is it changes every single year. The maps that we have this year, they won't be perfect because come next year, the ice has fallen, some's melted, because so much of it isn't visible. There's a lot that we don't know. And that doesn't sit well within the human mind, does it? To our imagination start playing games with us. I love this. I'd give this a solid 9 out of 10.
We're not getting out of here alive. But neither's that thing.
Why would you say it? You're perfectly capable, at least 3 of you, perfectly capable. You've got all the tools to escape. You've got all the means to make fire and to get a good distance away. If something's happened and you're isolated, you leave. You head to the nearest populated area or a place you could get help and you radio back what's happened or what you need or what support's necessary. I noticed that they are lighting what looks like TNT. Is it trinitro-toluene rods? They're lighting it right next to their chest, but they've also got other rods right next to their chest. I don't think that's something you do. Yes, fire is a good option. Every single predator I've ever come across is afraid of fire. Simple fact. The only things that are attracted by fire generally are insects. I don't think it's ever a good idea to blow up a hole in the middle of your camp. You've got what looks like a tracked vehicle there, which is, it could be some kind of small bulldozer or lifter. You've got the means to escape and to survive short term. The biggest threat out there is never going to be the wildlife. If you prepare for that, it's fine. If you carry a shotgun for the most extremes of circumstances, the biggest threat's always going to be exposure, making sure I'm prepared for whatever the weather's going to throw at me. No, not likely to face an alien. I love a sci-fi movie more than most, so I'm going to give this one a 5. But in terms of how realistic it is, I'm sorry, it's not doing much.
Don't do this, Luke. Come on, give me a sign here.
I know there's going to be a bright Star Wars super fan that's going to come and tell me exactly what animal that is.
But it'll keep you warm till I get the shelter up.
You should have had that up at the first hint that the weather was going to turn, had the shelter up. Secondly, in a survival situation, you take shelter where you can get it. I've heard of people sheltering in animal carcasses, in desert environments where they've come across a dead animal, but I've never heard of anyone finding an animal big enough in an Arctic environment to sleep inside. The average polar bear is probably about 8.5 feet tall, and that's it standing up. To fit inside of a polar bear torso, it's going to be a lot of work. If you're in the Arctic and you need shelter quickly, your best bet is to try and dig a snow hole or just pile up some snow to give you a break from the wind. Gosh, I'm a Star Wars fan. I'd give this a 5 out of 10. In Antarctica, the terrain is treacherous. Antarctica has the longest mountain range in the world. It's got areas where it's ice rubble. You can see in the scene there were piles of ice. They were pushing this little longboat. That vision of seeing completely flat Arctic tundra or completely flat terrain, it's a myth. It very, very rarely presents itself.
I'm not doing it, stupid! Look at the hull! You're supposed to be captain of this cutter and you're tearing it apart! That's right!
Nowadays, I think people tell you more about what you're doing and why you're doing it. I've been on expeditions where similar things have happened. We're walking across the Arctic, you know, we're day 10, day 11 in. My pulk, which is my sled, just started to feel heavier. And I realized that it was irrational when I went to my teammate, they, you know, walked ahead. I said, look, my pulk's heavy, you guys packed it wrong. My teammate laughed at me and said, but Dwayne, you packed your pulk yourself. Fundamentally, I hadn't eaten properly that morning and the evening before. And that's all it took for me to feel weaker, tired, drained, and fatigued. I'd give it a 6 or 7. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. So my journey into exploration was a bit of a strange one. I, you know, Googled North Pole, a few names popped up, and one of the names was Matthew Henson. And I was drawn to Matthew Henson because he was a black man. And I thought, I've never seen a black man in any Arctic book or anything. I think when people watch TVs and movies and shows and read, the biggest myth they get is that only one type of person goes there. You always see it's a white male who's about 50 years old, bearded, who's well-weathered, got some money behind them, that does this, and that's not the truth. We want more women doing it. We want more people from all different backgrounds doing it. If we follow what we're seeing on TV and in magazines and historical accounts, you'd think that no women had ever been to the pole.